Amen. Amen. Thanks so much, Brandy.
Thank you so much. You didn't need to do that. And honestly, you know that the Spirit is upon a congregation whenever they're able to work out what my favorite biscuit is to eat. Just like that there. I cannot believe you actually knew that there, and I'm really pleased about it. And Lucy, any time between the months of May and September, I'm more than happy to come and preach here. Any time in the autumn, spring, or winter months, you're on your own from now on. That's all I'm saying. So take from that what you will. I'm just going to. You can follow these verses if you want in your on your phones or Bible if you have one, from Romans chapter 13, and then I'm going to read out a couple of more famous verses that are very closely aligned to it, and we'll get underway from that point onwards. I didn't want Sharon to read the verses before the passage this morning. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continued debt to love one another. For he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law. Because the problem is that the verses just before that say, this is why you also pay taxes, right? And if you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Because these verses are essentially telling us that within the context of how we deal with each other, the law can be summed up as best as possible in these words: love your neighbors as yourself. And Jesus, obviously more famously, in Matthew 22, puts it like this. Hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Jesus, what's the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment, full stop. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself, for all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Matthew 22, verses 34 onwards. Let me say a quick prayer. So, dear Lord, as we open up your word and we look into it, we grant that it would never, Lord, return to you empty, but would achieve the purpose for which you have set it, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, I'm going to start off with a couple of things to make you think. The first is a riddle, okay, like a wee riddle here. And the second, I'm just going to use big words to make me sound smart. So stay awake with me this morning if you could. The riddle is this. I'm going to give you a few seconds. You don't have to give me the answer because I'm going to give you the answer in a second. What can be given that we cannot keep to gain what we cannot lose? But I've hinted at this before. What can be given that we cannot keep to gain what we cannot lose? I'm not asking for answers at the moment. I ain't giving you the answer, right? You're going to get the answer in a wee second or two. It's two, really. And I'm going to come across those in a moment. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of the term here. This is where you're going to get the big words: paradigm shift. Do you like what I've done there? Paradigm shift. You thought this was just going to be simple teaching this morning. Paradigm shift is when a fundamental change in a person's life or a society or a nation or even larger takes place. When a change in attitudes, a change in actions, usually really, really significant in some way, a change in values occurs. Paradigm shift, for instance, in a person's personal life might be when you come to faith, when things that went before have changed and they happen in a new way. A paradigm shift certainly happens when you get married, when things that all the old stuff of before, like not having to tidy up after yourself and things like that there, get changed. I had two paradigm shifts in my early 20s, two of them. And one of them I talked about last week, and I'll not say too much on it. And the second one was very new to me. And they occurred because of this. I was working full-time for an organization called Youth for Christ. So there I was in full-time ministry, doing a dream job, early 20s, 22, 23. But I was working for an organization that didn't pay very well. It's a Christian organization. And I was skint. And not only was I skint, that the money that I did earn, I had to raise 60% of it. So my first full-time job after leaving uni was to really go around and ask people to give me money so I could have a job, right? And I struggled with this. It was a good thing to do, and it was right, and I think they still do it, but I struggled with this. I was going out with my friends, and they'd all had their first jobs, and all still living at home, so we didn't have the same bills, and we were going out to restaurants, and I was getting the cheapest thing on the menu, and they were going on ski holidays, and I wasn't able to go on holidays with them and stuff like that. I didn't have the money. I was getting a little bit dissatisfied with my lot. A little bit of gurning was going on, as you probably can't imagine I would do that, but anyway, a little bit of gurning was going on. And then I went to God and asked God for answers for this. And God gave me answers. And the first paradigm shift was this, and I said it last week. I wasn't poor, I was rich. I had things that money could not buy, and I had treasure that rust and moth could not destroy. That's the answer to the riddle. What can a person give that they can't keep to gain what they can't lose? Their life, their soul. You give your life, something you cannot keep, to Christ, and you will gain eternal life that you cannot lose. No person is wiser than the person that realizes how important that is. And that's the first paradigm shift. I learned gratitude. The second paradigm shift was a lot harder than learning gratitude. I learned that I was selfish and self-centered. That's what I learned. Now, no person really says that they're not selfish in some way, or they're not a little bit self-centered. But not many people really do believe it about themselves. And that was a struggle to come to terms with. At the end of the day, I'm selfish and self-centered. At least I was then, but less so now. At the end of the day, I had to come to that realization. And that was a massive shift in my thinking. You see, nobody likes to think that about themselves. Nobody likes to think that maybe some of the good deeds that we do are really about making us feel better for ourselves. Nobody likes it when they maybe come to the realization that the nice things we often treat just like the sprinkles on the top of the cake, but the cake itself is really about ourselves. And whenever I came to that realization, I started to realize that, in fact, quite quickly, that the more I orientated myself towards God and from God to others, then actually the better life was. Not just for my sake, but because I was walking in the way I was supposed to walk. That was the biggest paradigm shift of all. The realization, if you want to put it more bluntly, that I was a sinner, and I still am. And the realization that everything about that should point us towards Jesus Christ and what he wants. So what does that mean? Well, it meant that as a young man in my 20s, worrying about money, the first thing I did to really sort that issue out was I started tithing. And that was easy to do when you don't earn much money, right? But then the more money you earn, the more that money grows. But I still did it. And I didn't just tithe, I started to do my offerings as well. And to this day, that has been one of the greatest blessings in my life. From when I had no money to now when I have a bit more money, but got more money than people that take that money off me. But anyway, I'll not talk about my daughters again. I learned to tithe, and I learned not to tithe, but actually to say, okay, what am I going to do on top of this? And I learned to do that to the point of where it caused me a little bit of pain. Because if it wasn't causing me a little bit of pain to give away, it wasn't really doing what it was meant to do. Hope that sort of makes sense. So I did that. I started to tithe. I learned that you don't just give to receive, but you give to give. You just give to give. And if you get something back from it, like some tonics tea cakes, great. It's a wee bonus. But you don't do it to get anything back. You just do it to do it. I learned to give my time. I learned to pray for others every day. I learned to serve more and to compete less. And I learned from all of that a deeper, more fundamentally real walk with Jesus Christ. They were the two paradigm shifts. Gratitude and giving myself to others. I'm still self-centered a bit too much, but a lot less than I was before. And this side of glory will never be perfect, but we can certainly get ourselves on the right track. I don't know if any of you have had those realizations. The realization that it's not what you thought. The realization that you are not as kind as you thought you would be, and that's okay. The realization that in everything you need to pull your socks up and give more to Christ. But if you haven't, or you need to go through it again, I encourage you to do it. I encourage you to sit down, to think about it, to have a paradigm shift, to turn once again to Christ. You see, the experts of the law come to test Jesus, and they come with, this trick question, if you want to call it that. What's the greatest of these commandments? And they maybe had their own answers. And Jesus comes up with some of the most famous words in the Bible. Love God with everything, heart, soul, mind, strength. And then this is the first and the greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. If we want to learn what it means to give to others, we need to first of all understand those greatest commandments. And I'll say, if I can, 3 quick things about them. The first is this. If you fall into the trap of mixing the order of those 2 commandments around, you will not learn what it means to love your neighbor, to love others, to give to others. Far too many of us have fallen into the trap. If I was to stand up here and say, I'm going to read you some words from Matthew 22. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. This is the first and the greatest commandment. The second is like it, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Some of us would take a moment before we realize that that was the wrong way around. And many, many of us as Christians get that order the wrong way around. And it's easy to get it the wrong way around, because it means we can just do good things and kind things and nice things, and that's all great. And we can just do that without reference to God. In other words, if I'm doing something nice in the community, it must be good, must be of God, it must be Christian because it's a nice thing and I think I'm doing a nice thing. But we open ourselves up into falling into one of the greatest traps of Christianity, which is to put our definition of love before God's. There's a reason why it happens in that order. The reason why the 10 Commandments say, no other gods before me. Do not make yourself an idol. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. And remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy, before it talks about how we relate to others. Because without a reference point to God, you and I don't know what love is. Other points are going to be shorter than this here, by the way. But this is really, really important. You and I, if we decide we're going to love our neighbor, and whatever it is just going to be love, we do it without a reference point to God and the truth. And that can be dangerous. I watched a movie last night. Really, really slow, dull movie. But there was a point in it that was really interesting. It's an older man, and he's talking to somebody younger, and they ask him about his life, his adult daughter he's got a strained relationship with. Why do you have a strained relationship with your adult daughter? And he goes, well, I left her mum when she was young. And then he went, no, that's not quite true. I left her mum when she was pregnant. And the other person goes, well, why did you do that? And he says, well, I fell in love with another woman. And the other character doesn't blink an eyelid. Okay, I understand, right? That's not love. Too many people think if I put the word love in front of this, it's okay, right? Leaving your wife when she's pregnant for another woman because you love her is not love. And when we start to say it's love because I say it's love, do you know who God is? God's ourselves. God is us. When you do these things without a reference point to God, God becomes yourself. Now, that doesn't mean that people who aren't Christians and everything else don't do good and wonderful things and can't do great acts of love. Absolutely they can. Absolutely they can, of course. But you and I, when we do it without that godly reference point, we are taking ourselves away from God and into something else. I'm being a wee bit, I know I'm being stark about that. But remember this. Jesus says you've got to love me first, because everything that's right about this world, everything that, remember that every law that even holds the physics of the universe together are all in Jesus Christ. So whenever you do that without reference to Christ, without loving him first, you can stray away from that. The Church of England, 3 weeks ago, was it? Archbishop of York, the second in command of the Church of England, basically said, and I heard this radio broadcast. He basically said that as long as you're in a faithful and a committed and a loving relationship, any sort of sexual intimacy, that's all fine. It's all fine as long as there's love involved. That's not scriptural. It's not what Jesus said here. It's not the truth. It might suit people, and that's okay if it suits them, but it's not the truth. And when you and I mix those things up, we stray from the truth, and when you stray from the truth, you stray from love. Okay, and these other things are quicker. What is Jesus saying when he's talking about these things as well? First of all, don't mix the order them up. But secondly, too, and this is for you and I, it's okay to have the attitude that just because you're serving and loving others, that it's okay to look after yourself too. Right? Sometimes we try to go a little bit beyond God, and we say our lives are just about other people. No matter what the help is, no matter what the pressure, my life is dedicated just to other people. But it's not, it's dedicated to God first. And God sometimes says to us, do you know what? Go and have a laugh and take care of yourself. Go on a holiday. Get some rest. You don't have to be involved in that ministry. Spend some time with me. My yoke is easy and my burdens are light. So don't confuse ministering to others with being incompatible to ministering to yourself. Does that make sense, okay? Where yourself has to be somebody else, I don't know the line. That's why it's about concentrating on God first. So secondly, treat yourself or take care of yourself. Treat yourself. Go and get yourself some tonics, tea cakes, and sit and watch TV and have 2 or 3 of them, but not 4 or 5. You get sick. And then thirdly on this here, and then I'm going to do the hows. Command those who are rich, Timothy tells us, or Paul's letter to Timothy tells us, commands those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In other words, seek the good, seek God, seek the good of others, seek the good for yourself, and you'll see that from that, of enjoying what God has given us, you can be rich in good deeds and generous and willing to share. I'm going to sum it up on what an older lady in our church said to me when I was young. God first, me second, everybody else somewhere in between. So, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? I'm going to just summarize this by saying, firstly, to give to others, examine your heart. That's number 1. Secondly, follow Christ's example, number 2. These aren't in any particular order, by the way, but I'm just doing it this way. And thirdly, choose to serve. So examine your heart, follow Christ's example, and choose to serve. Examine your heart by doing this. Think. Do some thinking. Thinking in my house is a punishment that my wife gives us, right? Whenever our daughters would have done something wrong when they were younger, I would have just punished them some way, taken their phone away or shouted at them, or one of those kind of dad practical things that I think works better, right? My wife did something much, much worse. She made them go away and think about what they'd done, right? Our daughters hated having to think about something that they'd done wrong. I hate having, my wife sends me away to think about things too every now and again. I hate it as well, right? People hate to think, right? Not everybody, but a lot of us, we hate to think because it takes us in a bit of a rabbit hole. We don't want to know what we'll discover. Examine your heart and think about this. What are you doing that you shouldn't be doing? What have you not opened yourself up to? Are you too busy? Are you walking on by when it comes to sharing with others? Are you not opening your life, your heart, your time, your home, your wallet, and your purse to other people in your life? Got a great story to tell you that came across. It's 10 years old, this story, and came across this a few weeks ago. In Romania, true story, young boy, 13 years of age, called Christian, believe it or not. And he's walking down the street one day, this little fella, and he sees a commotion going on. And a tragedy is taking place in this local house, poor village in Romania. A little 3-year-old boy, ironically called Gabriel, right, has fallen down a well shaft, basically a concrete pipe dug into the ground about 15 meters. So, nearly the height of this church, into the ground. The concrete well is this wide. And firemen, rescuers, everybody else, you can see video of this if you want to go and look it up. Absolutely, everybody is distraught. They can't get this little boy out. He's injured. He's only 3. Time is run out for him. He's in cold water. And if they don't rescue him soon, he'll die. They have diggers around the site. They're trying to dig up. They can't do that. They realize that's not going to work. They're lowering ropes into this shaft to try to get him. They can't get him out either. You can literally see the father wailing in the background. All these other people just distraught. This wee 13-year-old fella, wee skinny wee lad, he actually was the sort of fella that, if you read about his story, he's actually just loved to help people out. And he came along and had a look and seen what was the matter and just said, I could go down the well. I'm small enough, I can go down the well. And the firemen wouldn't let him do it. He's going to get stuck and all that sort of stuff. But they've no choice. And you go and look this up, you see it online, like bring a tear to your eye. They tie ropes around his ankles and around his waist. And they just lower him head first down the well. 2 minutes later, up he comes with this wee boy in his arms. And boys rescued and all that sort of stuff. And it's lovely, lovely to see. And the wee fella, they ask him, well, how'd you feel? And he's like, yeah, it was good. 13-year-old boy, not thinking about anything at all. Yeah, it was good. Yeah, just thought I could help out. Saves this child's life. God's not calling you to be a hero, but He is calling you to not walk on by. Loads and loads of 13-year-old boys or anybody else who would have walked past, felt really sorry, said a prayer, maybe, walked on by. God is just calling you not to walk on by when you don't need to. You shouldn't. And then follow Christ's example. And I just want to say this, to be brief on this. If you want to learn how to serve other people, and you should, just read the Gospels a bit more. That's all. That's our challenge for you and I. That's our homework. Just try to read the Gospels a bit more and find out what Christ actually did and what He actually said and what He actually prayed. Just do that. It used to be back in the day we would have the "What Would Jesus Do" bracelets and stuff when I was young. Are you old enough for that, Lucy? You're dead young. You remember it from a history book, right? And what would Jesus do? And that's a big part of the question. That's the question, and it's the answer all in the one sentence. What would Jesus do? Jesus would do this. He called them together and He said, that the rulers of the Gentiles lorded over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great amongst you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give His life as a ransom for many. King of kings, Lord of lords, came to serve. And then lastly, choose to serve. This is the hard part, but also the easiest part at the same time. If you and I start to develop an attitude of servanthood and giving and sharing with others, we will find that the easiest when we just do it in small deeds first. You know the Bible verse about being faithful in little things, and you'll be given more things to do. If you're somebody that helps to put the chairs away and do the dishes and all those sort of things, you'll probably find that you'll be the person that God will give other things to do as well. If you're the person that has time for somebody else to have a chat, you'll probably find God will build you up to other things as well. Now, you don't do the dishes so that one day you'll be a famous helper, right? You do the dishes and you keep doing the dishes, right? But when you do that faithfully, you start small, you find that God uses you for really significant things. Why would He not? Why would He not take one of you who knows how to do simple good deeds to the people around you and use you for something significant. If God had somebody in this area that he needed you to have a conversation with, or he needed them to have just a listening ear, right? Why would he not choose the person that faithfully does the dishes? Because they're probably decent. Does that make sense? Get into that habit of giving a little bit of your time in good deeds. That's the easy part. The harder part is to get into the habit of giving your time to people. I find this the hardest part anyway, right? Because I'm introverted and I naturally don't really like being in the company of people. Present company accepted, of course. I have to say that, right? Right? And you know, like not all the time, I'm not that introverted, right? I'm not trying to hide myself in a garden shed somewhere, right? But the hard part of this is when you give something to people. That you give of your time, and then you give of your pride, because you're trying to put yourself a little bit lower than them. And then maybe you give off something that serves them. And then maybe you let them get their way. Maybe you let them sometimes have a wee bit of the glory at the front or something. I don't know, and it's not you. Maybe you give up a place in something so somebody else can grow. That's giving yourself to others. In fact, this is my challenge. I love throwing this out to different churches. Every Christian should have a friend that they don't like. Okay? Every Christian. Now stop looking at the people sitting beside you, right? Okay, just in case they work it out, just stare straight at me. Don't give anything away at this point, right? Okay, we don't want that. Don't cast your eyes, Lucy. You just look at me anyway, you're okay. You can think, that's brandy for me. That's brandy, right? What do I mean by this? Every Christian should have a friend that we don't like. It's dead easy to have friends and people that you share everything in common with. And they're a good laugh. And they like you, and you don't have to do anything about it. It's not so easy to spend time with somebody you don't have anything in common with. Or they're a little bit difficult. Or you don't realize that they think you're a little bit difficult. Or they've got habits you don't like, or they're a bit odd, but you're normal. They're the ones that are odd, so on and so forth. Every Christian should have somebody that they spend time with, that they don't naturally want to do it, but we do it because we're not friends. What are we? Family. We're family. So if you don't have that person in your life, you should have. Don't do it today, right? Because they'll understand. They'll cotton on to this. So when you're having tea and coffee, and somebody walks up to you and says, I realize we haven't spent a lot of time together. Do you want to go out for coffee this week? Right? I could give the game away. You're only taking me for coffee because you want me to be the friend that you don't really like very much. I understand what's going on here, right? I thought that was wise until I realized, no joke, I think loads of my friends, I am that person. So, I finish on this. Actually, I'm going to go on too long here. I'm going to ask, is the band here, the band about? They're at the back, Aaron? What are you doing at the back instead of the front? Right? When you're coming up in the band, I want to tell this last story about what it means to share life with others. And it kind of goes like this, because it's about a band. I have a friend that years ago went on a YSC team in a band to France. And there were about 10 of them, most of them in the band, some of them helping out and all that sort of stuff. And in France, this is, 30 years ago or something like that, right? 25, 30 years ago. And in this band, they went around all of these villages and small towns in France and did concerts to share the gospel. And they went to this small town, all these seats out, just like this, in the town square, had the band and everything doing their thing. Started the concert. Nobody's there. Like, nobody is there with the exception of one mum and her young daughter. Nobody's there. And as they're getting ready to start, my friend said, he's only a teenager, he said they had this conversation about, do we do this? Do we literally do an evening's concert for these two people sitting there? Tell the story all the time, absolutely love it. And they decided they'd better do it anyway. And dear help the poor mum and the daughter having to sit the whole night through the concert, because you can't get up and go to the loo or do anything like that there, because literally half the audience is left, right? And they do the concert, and my friend told me this story. The most mortifying thing he's ever done in his life, a concert for 2 people. 10 years later, I was back in, by the way, the friend is not Aaron, just so you know, right? 10 years later, I was in France with the YFC, a year-out team. And in France, you have to travel from all over the place, 40, 50 miles just to go to a youth group. And there was a young woman there, probably in her 20s, and she came up to me and she said, I've never met anybody from Northern Ireland. And I just wanted to say to you that the last time I met people from Northern Ireland, I was at a concert with my mum, and I decided at that point, I'm going to come to faith and I'm going to follow Jesus Christ. Because these people loved God so much that they were willing to do a concert for me and my mum. And I went straight back and told my mate, I said, you see, you were gurning about this all those years, and I was using it as the most embarrassing talk that I could do, and now it's a different story. It's a different story. It went from being embarrassing to life-saving. And this morning as we worship, and we finish up, if there's something in your life that you're thinking you need to put to the side, an embarrassment of sharing your life with others, a habit that you don't do, a sin that's in your life, something that stops you, a lack of confidence or pride that stops you sharing your life with others, come and be prayed with this morning. Come to the front as you're used to doing that, or I'll be over there if you want me to pray with you too. Hand this to God. Share your life to His glory and their blessing. Aaron, thank you.